They didn't believe it at first. Reports claimed that a single American submarine, just one, had sunk 33 Japanese ships in only 9 months. To the Japanese Navy, it sounded impossible. To the Americans, it was the birth of a legend. This wasn't some oversized battleship or massive fleet operation. It was one silent hunter, sleek, deadly, and commanded by a man who refused to back down. Her name was USS Tang. In the chaotic waters of the Pacific during World War II, hundreds of ships clashed and thousands of men fought beneath the waves. But among them, one submarine stood apart, not for her size but for her accuracy, daring, and speed. She struck at night, unseen, slipping through enemy defenses like a ghost in the deep. Convoys that once moved confidently under the rising sun flag began to vanish, one after another. Each explosion echoed louder than the last, sending shockwaves through Japan's naval command. The Japanese intelligence officers began piecing together reports. Merchant ships gone missing, tankers split in two, destroyers sunk before they could fire back. All signs pointed to one vessel, one phantom beneath the waves. At first they thought it was an exaggeration, maybe propaganda to boost American morale. But then came the survivor testimonies, the wreckage photos, and the unmistakable torpedo patterns. There was no denying it anymore. The USS Tang was real, and she wasn't just good. She was rewriting the rules of undersea warfare. Behind that record was a crew of 87 men, led by a commander whose courage bordered on impossible. Richard O'Kane, a man who believed precision and instinct could outmatch even the largest enemy fleet. For 9 relentless months, Tang became Japan's worst nightmare. A submarine that appeared out of nowhere, struck with surgical accuracy, and disappeared before anyone could respond. But her story wasn't just about victories. It was about innovation, leadership, and ultimately, sacrifice. Because even legends have an ending, and Tang's final mission would prove that heroism sometimes comes at the highest cost imaginable. This is the story of the USS Tang, the deadliest submarine in World War II history. Before the USS Tang ever touched the ocean, before her torpedoes ever struck their first target, the Pacific was a nightmare for the Allies. It was 1942, and Japan's Imperial Navy ruled the seas. Their empire stretched across the Pacific like a steel wall, from the Philippines to Indonesia, from Guam to the Solomon Islands. Japanese warships dominated every horizon. The attack on Pearl Harbor had crippled America's battleships. The U.S. Navy, once proud and powerful, was suddenly outmatched, outgunned, and outnumbered. Every American ship that left port did so under the shadow of fear. Fear of enemy bombers, fear of destroyers, fear of the rising sun flag that seemed to own the ocean. But even in those dark days, the U.S. had one weapon Japan didn't fully understand: the submarine. While the Japanese built larger and faster surface fleets, the Americans quietly invested in stealth and endurance. Their submarines were smaller than battleships, but they carried a terrifying advantage. They could strike unseen. They were ghosts, slipping beneath the waves, moving silently through enemy lines and attacking when least expected. Still, the early days were tough. America's first torpedoes often malfunctioned, missing their targets, or worse, circling back on their own subs. Mechanical failures were common. Communication was limited. Many crews didn't return home. For a time, it seemed like even this silent weapon wasn't enough to turn the tide. But America learned fast. Every failure became a lesson. Every lost submarine became a blueprint for improvement. Engineers worked night and day to fix the torpedoes, improve sonar systems, and make the submarines deadlier with each new launch. And then came a new class, the Gato and Balau classes. Faster, quieter, more powerful. They could dive deeper, travel farther, and hit harder than anything before them. Among these cutting-edge designs was one vessel that would soon become the most feared name in the Pacific: USS Tang. Built at the Mare Island Navy Yard in California, Tang was more than just a machine. She was a symbol of how far America had come in just 2 years of war. Her hull was smooth, her engines powerful, her torpedoes newly perfected. She was designed to hunt the hunter, to challenge the Japanese Navy on its own turf. But what made Tang truly deadly wasn't her steel. It was her commander. Richard Hetherington O'Kane, a veteran submariner who had already served aboard the legendary USS Wahoo under Commander Mush Morton. From Wahoo, O'Kane learned that aggression and precision could make a submarine unstoppable. He studied his enemies, understood their weaknesses, and knew that the ocean could be both a weapon and a shield. When O'Kane took command of Tang, in 1943, he wasn't planning to play defense. He was planning to rewrite submarine warfare itself. Under his leadership, Tang would not just sink ships, she would stalk them like prey. She would attack from unexpected angles, strike multiple targets in minutes, and then vanish beneath the waves before the enemy could respond. Every mission was a gamble, one mistake, one depth charge, and it could all end in seconds. But O'Kane trusted his instincts, and his crew trusted him completely. By the time Tang was ready for her first patrol, the tides of war were beginning to shift. America had survived Midway, Guadalcanal, and the bloody island battles that tested every ounce of endurance. Now it was time to strike back, not with fleets or armies, but with a single submarine and a fearless crew ready to bring the war to Japan's doorstep. The ocean was about to meet its most dangerous predator. Every great war machine has a soul, and for the USS Tang, that soul was Commander Richard Hetherington O'Kane. O'Kane wasn't a man who shouted orders or sought fame. He was calm, analytical, and absolutely fearless. His crew said his eyes could cut through steel, not because he was cold, but because he was always thinking 3 moves ahead. Before Tang, O'Kane had already served aboard the USS Wahoo, one of the most famous submarines in the U.S. fleet. Under Commander Mush Morton, O'Kane learned lessons no textbook could ever teach. That aggression could be a submarine's greatest weapon, and hesitation could be its death sentence. He watched how Morton hunted, bold, relentless, never waiting for the perfect shot. O'Kane absorbed everything, and when his time came to command his own boat, he vowed to push those tactics even further, but with precision, not recklessness. When the Navy handed him command of the brand new USS Tang, SS-306, in late 1943, O'Kane saw more than a warship. He saw a chance to perfect submarine warfare. Tang was one of the new Palau-class submarines, the cutting edge of American naval design. She measured 311 feet long, could dive over 400 feet deep, and carried 24 torpedoes, enough firepower to sink an entire convoy. Her engines were quieter, her controls more responsive, and her radar more advanced than anything Japan had faced before. But technology alone didn't win wars. People did. And O'Kane knew that the bond between captain and crew would decide whether they lived or died beneath the waves. He handpicked his men, not just for skill but for nerve. Machinists, sonar operators, gunners, each one trained to perfection, each one knowing exactly what to do when the pressure gauge trembled and depth charges rattled the hull. O'Kane drilled them hard. Every maneuver, every torpedo launch, every emergency dive was practiced until it became instinct. He didn't want a crew that followed orders. He wanted a crew that anticipated them. Inside Tang, there was no room for fear. The men slept beside torpedoes, ate in narrow passageways, and worked in the deafening hum of diesel engines. But they did so with pride, because they knew they were part of something special. When Tang finally left Pearl Harbor for her first war patrol in early 1944, the crew wasn't nervous. They were hungry. Hungry to prove themselves, hungry to strike back for Pearl Harbor, and hungry to show that one submarine could make a difference. O'Kane stood in the conning tower that first night at sea, staring into the dark horizon. He knew what waited for them: destroyers with sonar, planes with depth charges, and entire Japanese fleets ready to hunt them down. But he also knew what Tang was capable of. He turned to his executive officer and said, "We'll hit them hard and we'll hit them fast. Surprise is our best armor." Those words became Tang's creed. From that moment on, she wasn't just a submarine, she was a predator. A silent, hunter moving through enemy waters with a single purpose: to destroy Japan's supply lines, cripple its fleets, and change the course of the Pacific War. In just a few weeks, the world would start to hear the name USS Tang, whispered first in confusion, then in fear, because what O'Kane and his crew were about to do had never been done before in the history of naval warfare. The legend was about to begin. The Pacific Ocean was vast, endless blue stretching to the horizon, but to Commander Richard O'Kane and the crew of the USS Tang, it was hunting ground. Each patrol meant weeks of silence, sweat, and nerves of steel. The men knew every sound: the hiss of valves, the soft hum of the motors, the faint creak of the hull under pressure. Down here, even a whisper could mean discovery. Their first mission began in the waters around Truk Lagoon, a fortress-like stronghold of the Japanese Navy. The area was crawling with enemy ships, destroyers, and aircraft patrols. Most submarines avoided it. O'Kane went straight in. He believed in calculated aggression: attack fast, get close, and disappear. That philosophy was about to make history. One moonless night, Tang's sonar picked up the rhythmic pulse of propellers, a Japanese convoy heading north, heavily loaded with troops and supplies. O'Kane ordered the sub to dive deep, then rise silently to periscope depth. Through the scope, he saw a row of merchant ships flanked by destroyers. Range: 2,000 yards, whispered the fire control officer. O'Kane didn't hesitate. Set depth 10 feet. Fire 1. The torpedo streaked away, invisible in the darkness. Seconds later, boom! A tanker erupted into flames, lighting the ocean like daylight. Panic spread through the convoy. The destroyers scrambled to react, dropping depth charges into the sea. O'Kane dove Tang deep. The sub shuddered violently as explosions thundered above, shockwaves rolling through the hull. Inside, the crew stayed silent, gripping their stations, waiting for the barrage to end. When the ocean finally calmed, Tang resurfaced. The convoy was gone, except for burning wrecks and oil slicks stretching for miles. That first success changed everything. The crew had seen their commander's strategy in action: bold, precise, and ruthless. From then on, confidence replaced caution. In the next few weeks, Tang struck again and again. Japanese ships that once sailed unchallenged began to vanish. A cargo ship carrying ammunition exploded so violently that shockwaves reached Tang's hull. Another time, O'Kane attacked a convoy from inside its formation, weaving between ships, firing torpedoes in every direction. Each patrol turned more daring than the last. O'Kane broke traditional rules, relying on instinct and timing. He often surfaced at night to attack with deck guns, using the darkness as cover. His crew became experts at fast reloads, launching a second strike before the enemy even spotted them. Soon, enemy radio traffic was filled with reports of a phantom submarine that appeared, struck, and disappeared. To the Japanese, Tang seemed supernatural. To the Americans, she was proof that innovation and courage could rewrite the balance of power. By mid-1944, Tang had already sunk over a dozen enemy ships. Each kill wasn't just a victory, and it was a message. Every freighter destroyed meant fewer supplies for Japanese troops. Every tanker sunk meant less fuel for their war machine. The crew of Tang grew closer with every mission. They shared jokes, wrote letters home, and found comfort in the routine, even as they knew death could come at any depth. O'Kane never asked his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself. His calm voice over the intercom became their anchor. When Tang returned to Pearl Harbor after her early patrols, the base erupted in cheers. Commanders shook hands. Mechanics lined the docks, word spread fast. O'Kane's submarine wasn't just lucky. It was legendary, but O'Kane wasn't celebrating. He knew this was only the beginning. The Japanese Navy would adapt. Their escorts would grow smarter, their weapons deadlier, and to stay alive, Tang would have to become even faster, stealthier, and more aggressive than ever before. The ocean was starting to whisper her name, and soon, the world would hear it roar. By mid-1944, the USS Tang had become a legend whispered across the Pacific. Convoys that once sailed boldly through open waters now crept along the coastlines, terrified of the unseen hunter that struck from the deep. Every ship captain in the Japanese Navy knew the name Tang. Every American sailor wanted to serve under Commander Richard O'Kane. O'Kane's brilliance wasn't just in his aim, and it was in his intuition. He could sense a convoy before radar detected it, predict enemy movements like a chess master, and attack in ways no textbook had ever taught. While other submarines fired from safe distances, O'Kane crept close, sometimes within 900 yards, to ensure every shot counted. That daring strategy paid off. In her next patrols, Tang tore through enemy shipping lanes like a blade through silk. Merchant ships, troop carriers, and even warships fell victim to her torpedoes. Each strike was a masterpiece of timing, silent, sudden, and devastating. O'Kane developed a rhythm, approach from the dark side of the convoy, fire, multiple torpedoes in rapid succession, deep before the first explosion hits, resurface to finish off. Survivors, the crew worked like a single heartbeat, reloading torpedoes, tracking sonar echoes, and plotting escape routes. Every man knew his role. They trusted O'Kane completely, and he trusted them with his life. By July 1944, Tang's success had become almost unbelievable. In a single mission, she sank 10 ships, a record unmatched in submarine warfare. O'Kane personally directed nearly every torpedo, his eyes glued to the periscope, his hands steady as steel. He didn't just hunt ships. He hunted patterns. He knew that cutting off supply routes would cripple Japan's war effort faster than sinking battleships. So Tang targeted tankers, transports, and cargo freighters, the veins that kept Japan's military alive. Every kill sent ripples through the enemy command. Tokyo issued urgent orders to find and destroy this American submarine at all costs. Destroyers were reassigned. Patrol zones doubled. But Tang was always one step ahead. At night, she prowled the waters near Formosa, then slipped south toward the South China Sea, where dozens of Japanese ships still dared to travel. There, Tang unleashed a storm of destruction unlike anything seen before. Convoy after convoy disappeared. In 9 months, Tang sank 33 enemy vessels, totaling over 116,000 tons of shipping, an all-time record that no other American submarine would ever surpass. For the Japanese Navy, it was a nightmare. For the United States, it was proof that one submarine, with courage, strategy, and teamwork, could change the course of the Pacific War. The crew grew into heroes overnight. Newspapers back home printed their victories. At Pearl Harbor, O'Kane was hailed as the Navy's top submarine commander. Yet beneath the pride, O'Kane remained humble. He knew every victory came at a cost: sleepless nights, constant tension, and the weight of lives taken beneath the waves. Still, the mission wasn't over. The war was far from won. When Tang prepared for her 5th patrol, O'Kane called his men together. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "we've made history, but history doesn't end here. We still have work to do." There was silence in the control room. Every man understood. They would go out again, one more time, into enemy waters that grew deadlier with each passing week. The Pacific had given Tang glory, but it also demanded respect, and sometimes sacrifice. As the submarine slipped from Pearl Harbor for what would become her final mission, the sea was calm, the sky cloudless. The men laughed, wrote letters home, and prepared for another hunt. No one aboard knew it yet, but destiny was already waiting, somewhere out there. Beneath the waves, October 1944, the USS Tang sailed out from Pearl Harbor on what would be her 5th and final patrol. The crew was confident, veterans now, but even the most seasoned men felt the weight of danger pressing closer than ever before. The Pacific had changed. The Japanese Navy, once scattered and disorganized, was now desperate and aggressive. They had reinforced their convoys with destroyers, laid new minefields, and equipped their ships with improved sonar and radar systems. The Hunter was now entering a deadlier ocean. Commander Richard O'Kane knew it, but he also knew something else. This was the war's decisive moment. Japan's shipping lanes were choking, and one more major blow could cripple their supply lines entirely. The mission: patrol the Formosa Strait, one of the most heavily guarded waterways in the Pacific. Few submarines returned from there. But O'Kane didn't hesitate. "That's where the ships are," he said simply, and so Tang dove into enemy territory once again. The patrol started as expected, with success. In just a few days, Tang had sunk several freighters and tankers. Each attack was a display of precision and confidence. The crew joked, ate canned peaches from their victory rations, and kept spirits high. Then, on the night of October 23, 1944, the sea turned into chaos. Tang picked up radar signals, a massive convoy moving through the Luzon Strait. It was the largest target O'Kane had ever seen. Tankers, cargo ships, and escorts in tight formation. Perfect hunting ground. At midnight, Tang surfaced under cover of darkness and moved. In for the kill, torpedoes streaked through the black water. One after another, explosions followed in rapid succession. Fireballs lit the horizon as ships burned and sank. It was a slaughter. O'Kane maneuvered for a second strike. He had only 2 torpedoes left. The first fired clean, another direct hit. Then came the last torpedo tube, and the crew watched it leave the launcher. A perfect shot aimed at a distant freighter. Seconds passed. Then, a flash of light, a blinding explosion, not ahead, but behind them. The torpedo had malfunctioned, made a deadly circle, and was coming straight back. "Hard right rudder," O'Kane shouted. The engines roared, but it was too late. A thunderous blast ripped through Tang's stern. The submarine bucked violently. Lights flickered, alarms screamed, and the sea rushed in. In seconds, Tang began to sink, the control room filled with smoke and chaos. Men shouted orders, tried sealing hatches, fought to reach the escape chamber. The once invincible Hunter was now dying in the same waters she had ruled. Kane and a few crew members were thrown into the water as the submarine broke apart. He watched, helpless, as Tang slipped beneath the waves, her propellers vanishing into the darkness. Only 9 men survived the explosion. They clung to floating debris as dawn broke over a calm, cruel sea. Hours later, a Japanese destroyer, one of Tang's former targets, found them and took them prisoner. O'Kane and his men were beaten, interrogated, and held in brutal prison camps for the rest of the war. But even there, in the shadow of defeat, O'Kane carried the pride of his crew, men who had achieved the impossible. The USS Tang had sunk 33 enemy ships in 9 months, destroyed over 116,000 tons of enemy shipping, and rewritten submarine warfare forever. And in the cruelest twist of fate, she was sunk by her own torpedo, the same weapon that had made her unstoppable. Years later, when O'Kane was freed and returned home, he received the Medal of Honor for his heroism. He never forgot his men. He never forgot Tang. For him, she wasn't just a machine, she was alive, forged in steel, powered by courage and remembered in glory. The sea took her body, but not her spirit. Because legends like the USS Tang don't sink, they live forever in the silence beneath the waves. The Pacific was silent again. Where once the USS Tang prowled with deadly precision, now there was only the quiet roll of the waves, and memories buried deep below. Of the 79 men aboard, only 9 survived the explosion that claimed the submarine. Those who escaped faced a nightmare of their own, floating helplessly through the wreckage of their own triumph, surrounded by oil, debris, and the haunting glow of burning ships. When dawn broke, the survivors were captured by a Japanese patrol vessel. For Commander Richard O'Kane and his crew, the war wasn't over. It had entered a darker chapter. They were beaten, interrogated, and thrown into cramped prison cells, treated as war criminals rather than soldiers. O'Kane endured starvation, isolation, and relentless questioning. Yet he never broke. He refused to give up details of American submarine tactics or reveal classified operations. Even in captivity, he remained what he had always been, a commander leading by example, giving hope where none seemed possible. Back home, the USS Tang was listed as missing, presumed lost. Families received telegrams of condolences, and the Navy mourned what it thought was another tragic casualty of war. No one knew the full story. Not yet. It wasn't until after Japan's surrender in 1945 that the truth emerged. When O'Kane and the other survivors were liberated from prison camps, they returned home and told their story. a story so unbelievable that many refused to accept it at first. A submarine sunk by its own torpedo. It sounded impossible, but it was true. O'Kane's first-hand account, backed by Japanese naval records, confirmed every detail. Tang had been struck by her own faulty weapon, one that had malfunctioned and turned back on her, ending her reign of dominance in a single tragic instant. Yet, even in death, Tang's legend only grew stronger. Her combat record, 33 ships sunk in 9 months, totaling over 116,000 tons of enemy shipping, stood unmatched in the history of the United States Navy. No other submarine achieved such a devastating impact in such a short time. The Navy honored Tang and her crew with multiple decorations. O'Kane received the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military award, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty. Each surviving crew member was hailed as a hero, men who had served aboard what many called the most successful submarine in history. But for O'Kane, medals were not what mattered. He often said that the true honor belonged to his men, the ones who never came home. When he spoke of Tang, it was never in boastful terms. It was always with quiet reverence, as though speaking of an old friend lost too soon. In the years after the war, O'Kane continued to serve the Navy, helping to train a new generation of submariners. He taught not only tactics but values, discipline, courage, and humility. His lectures often ended the same way. Remember your crew. Remember that a submarine isn't just steel. It's men, trust, and teamwork. Decades later, when he retired, the name USS Tang was still spoken with awe. Museums dedicated exhibits to her story. Naval cadets studied her missions as examples of tactical brilliance, and at reunions the few surviving crewmen would gather, sharing stories of laughter and fear, of victory and loss. To this day, the wreck of the USS Tang rests on the ocean floor. Silent, proud and eternal, divers have never reached her, but sonar scans have mapped her resting place, confirming her final position in the depths of the Luzon Strait. For those who know her story, she isn't just another submarine. She represents the spirit of human courage, the willingness to fight against impossible odds, to risk everything, and to stand unbroken even in defeat. The USS Tang may have vanished beneath the waves, but her name still echoes in every sonar ping, in every ship that sails free because of the men who dared everything for victory. She was more than a machine. She was a legend, and legends never sink. The story of the USS Tang is more than a war story. It's a story about what human courage can achieve and what it can cost. When people speak of Tang today, they don't just remember a submarine, they remember a symbol of innovation, bravery, and the indomitable will to fight even when the odds are impossible. Commander Richard O'Kane and his crew were not born heroes. They were ordinary men, engineers, sailors, mechanics, and young recruits, brought together by a mission that demanded everything they had. They faced an enemy that outnumbered them 100 to 1, in an ocean that could crush them in seconds, yet they went anyway. In the cold silence of the deep sea, bravery had no speeches, no applause. It was found in the quiet moments, in the steady hands of the torpedo man, in the calm voice of the commander, in the shared look between shipmates when they knew they might not come back. The USS Tang became great, not because of her weapons, but because of the men who believed she could do the impossible. Every patrol she sailed redefined submarine warfare. Her radar, her firing techniques, her stealth maneuvers, all became part of the Navy's playbook for decades to come. Tang proved that strategy, innovation, and courage could triumph, even in the face of overwhelming power. But her story also carried a lesson carved in tragedy, that greatness often walks hand in hand with risk. Her destruction by her own torpedo wasn't just bad luck. It was a reminder of the fine line between mastery and fate. Even the most advanced weapon can turn against its maker. Even the most skilled commander can't control the ocean forever. Yet, what defined Tang was not how she sank, but how she lived. In just 9 months, she achieved what entire fleets could not. She choked the lifelines of an empire and changed the balance of the Pacific War. Her success wasn't measured in tonnage or trophies. It was measured in the freedom her actions helped secure. For Commander O'Kane, the war ended long before his memories did. He spent the rest of his life honoring his crew, visiting families, writing letters, and speaking of them with reverence. He called them the finest men I ever knew. When he was asked once what kept him going during the darkest moments, he said quietly, "It was the thought of my men, their trust, their courage, their belief in me. I could never fail them." Today, the USS Tang is studied not just in military history, but in leadership courses and naval academies. Her story teaches that courage isn't loud, it's disciplined, intelligent, and unyielding, that innovation isn't about technology alone, it's about the human mind daring to think differently. And that sacrifice isn't just about dying for a cause, it's about living every second with purpose and conviction. In every submarine that dives beneath the waves today, there's a little of Tang's spirit known in the design. The sea has many stories, but few are told with the power and heart of the USS Tang, the submarine that became a legend.